Great. So, Karsten, I think you signed up to lead us in. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, I hope you've all had a good night's sleep over there in the
Great. So,
US.
Karsten, I think,
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that was the live stream starting and getting picked up on the mic, but
yeah, that was my bad. Sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, I just want to say I hope you've had a good night's sleep over there and that your astral body has been separated from your etheric body and you've been in deep sleep and in this way have become replenished during the night. So this chapter 3, it's about sleep and it's about death. And Steiner, he leads us in by saying that the essence of man's waking consciousness cannot be penetrated without observing the condition he lives through in sleep. And so too is the riddle of life insoluble without the study of death. So we're to understand that if we want to understand consciousness, we need to understand the whole cycle, the whole sleep waking cycle. And if you want to understand life, we need to understand the whole life death cycle. So there's some kind of analogy here. And he also quotes Goethe's famous saying that nature herself invented death to have abundant life. And then you could say what he's doing in this chapter is that he's connecting the sleep waking cycle and the life death cycle to the anthropology that he introduced in chapter 2, where you have this sevenfold man and what he's describing kind of the dynamics in the interaction between these bodies or forms during sleep and also during death. So the first part is about sleep, and later on he starts introducing death. And I should say I'm reading the Adams translation, so I've looked at page 60 to 80. I think that was what was on for today. And so talking about this relationship between the physical body, in particular the etheric body, and the astral body. On page 64, he says, the form and shape proper to the physical body of man can only be maintained by means of a human etheric body, which in turn must be endowed with the appropriate forces by the astral body. The ether body is the form-giving agent or architect of the physical, but it can only form the physical body aright if it receives from the astral body the necessary guidance and stimulation. In the astral body are the pattern forms or archetypes according to which the etheric body gives the physical its appointed shape. So there's some kind of hierarchy here where you could say the astral body is invigorating the etheric body, enforcing it, and then the etheric body is informing the physical body. And the reason why we need to sleep is because in waking consciousness, he says that the archetypical patterns of the astral body are replaced with images from the physical surroundings of the individual. And he talks about it as a kind of disturbance of the peace that the astral body has when it's in its own realm, so to speak. So for the say replenishment of the physical body to happen, the astral body during sleep needs to be separated from the etheric body and be in its own universe, which is a universe of archetypical patterns. And having this experience, and this is something that happens in dreamless sleep, the astral body is replenished, and then when it reconnects with the etheric body, it can transfer some kind of force to the etheric body that allow the etheric body again to inform and enliven or invigorate the physical body. So talking about the astral body, on page 66, he's comparing the necessity of the physical body to have food with what is happening to the astral body during sleep. So he says, as food and other necessities are received by the physical body from its environment, so do the pictures of the astral body's environment come to it during sleep. The fact is that the astral body is then living outside the physical and the etheric in the great universe, the self-same universe out of which the entire man is born. For in that universe is the source of the creative patterns, the archetypical pictures to which man owes his form. So I think we're to understand here when he's talking about the universe, he's not talking about only the physical universe, it's something more general. And it's a world, it's a universe of archetypical patterns that we live in. And then he goes on page 69, he outlined this fact about the astral body needing to be withdrawn from both the etheric body and from the physical. So he says on page 69, for dreamless sleep, the astral body has to be withdrawn both from the etheric body and from the physical. In dreaming, while separated from the physical body, it still remains connected to some extent with the etheric. The very fact that what is going on in the astral body is perceived in pictures is due to its connection with the etheric body. The moment this connection too is severed, the pictures fade into complete unconsciousness. Dreamless sleep ensues. So,
dreamless sleep.
Sorry, dreamless sleep, ensues. Sorry, I'm a little so now to ensues. I think that's how it's pronounced. So he's also talking about that a dream translates bodily conditions into symbolic pictures. He's not, in this piece at least, he's not touching upon things like lucid dreaming, or that dreams also can be informed somehow from the spiritual domain. It's my experience that can happen, but he's mainly talking about dreams as a translation into symbolic pictures of some bodily conditions. So he's talking about heat and so on. If you're too warm, that is translated into a dream picture of fire and so on. So that's on page 69, he goes into these matters. And then he moves on to talk about death. So just to sum up that basically when we sleep, the connection between the etheric body and the physical body remains intact, but the astral body has to be disconnected from the etheric body to be replenished in this astral world of archetypical patterns, and then it will reconnect. And then he goes on to talk about death, and he says on page 71, when someone falls asleep, whereas his astral body is released from its connection with the etheric and physical bodies, the latter still remain united. That's the thing I was talking about. The etheric and the physical remain united during sleep. Not so in death. Left to its own unaided forces, the physical body will now inevitably disintegrate. So the thing about death is that it's the separation of the etheric from the physical, and then there is no longer this informing force, you could say, that will keep the physical body in its shape. And he also talked about the etheric and astral bodies not separating immediately after death. They hold together, he says, for a few days, but he also hints on the fact that it depends on the individual. So it can be different for different individuals for how long the etheric and the astral bodies will be connected. And this gives rise to, well, maybe I should, there's another quote here from page 73, where he says, while man is joined to his physical body, the outer world enters his consciousness in images. After the physical body has been laid aside, he becomes aware of the experiences the astral body undergoes when unconnected with the outer world by physical sense organs. Its still remaining connection with the etheric body stands in the way of any new experience, but it possesses in an enhanced degree the memory of the past earth life, which memory the etheric body, being still united with it, makes to appear in a vivid, all-embracing tableau. So here he's talking about this very popular idea, experience, that if you have a near-death experience, you will kind of see all your life pass before you in a split second. And he's talking about that's due to this remaining connection. It's kind of the memories of your physical life that is contained in the etheric body and then experienced in the astral body as long as it's still connected to the etheric body. And also on page 75, he says, gathered together in a great memory tableau, the past life of man comes before him during the time immediately following his death. Thereafter, the astral body, severed now from the etheric, goes on its further way alone and by itself. It's not difficult to see that in this astral body, there will now remain whatever it has made its own by dint of its own activity while living in the physical. The ego has to some extent elaborated spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man. These, insofar as they are evolved, owe their existence to the ego or the I, not to the organs of the bodies. Now, by its very essence, the I is the being which needs no outer organs for its perception. No more does it need outer organs to retain what it has once united with itself. So here he's talking about the fact that the habits we've had, or our actions in physical life and our interests, has a significance for how we experience, say, the spiritual world we enter into when we die. So he's talking about, I think he's talking about three different kind of interests that we can have. So when we're in the physical existence, we have some natural cravings. So we need food, for example. And he says that these natural cravings, they can serve spirit. And perhaps he's also thinking about the fact that when you take in food, for example, it's not necessarily only a physical pleasure, but it can be kind of a spiritual thing as well. A meal, it can be some kind of artistic expression that you can enjoy just as much as you enjoy the pleasure of being fed and having the right things to eat. And then, of course, we have our spiritual interests, our interest in our own evolution, for example, and to be cooperative in our own evolution. You could say our interest in the true, the good, and the beautiful. These are our spiritual interests. And then there's a group of cravings, and I think perhaps he's talking about addictions and so on, where it's pure physical cravings and they're not serving spirit. And he's talking about the fact that when we move into death, or when we die and move into the spiritual realm, these cravings cannot be satisfied in the spiritual world. So we have he used the image that we have some experience like he's talking about being thirsty in the desert with no water inside anywhere. So the image I get is something like Dante's Inferno, where you have this imagery of people having desires they cannot have fulfilled and kind of being suffering in that way, having a hunger that cannot be fulfilled. So these are the kind of pure physical pleasures that are not serving spirit. And I think the way he describes it is as some kind of purgatory. So we need that some kind of purification is needed when we enter into the spiritual world. And on page 76, he says, the cravings and desires which spring from the nature of the three lower bodies can only take effect in the outer world. When these bodies are laid aside, these cravings cease. So our natural cravings cease because they're physical nor spiritual. Due as it is to the external body, hunger is naturally silenced when this body is no longer joined to the ego. When death has taken place, the ego, if it had now no other cravings than derived from its own spiritual nature, could draw full satisfaction from the spiritual world into which it is then transplanted. But life has given it other cravings besides these. So this is where he thinks about these physical satisfactions that do not serve spirit. They cannot be satisfied in the spiritual world. So the natural cravings, they simply vanish. And the spiritual cravings we can have fulfilled in the spiritual world. But the physical satisfactions that do not serve spirit, they cannot be satisfied in the spiritual world. And on page 79, he has this image where I think it's like a bit like Dante's Inferno or perhaps Purgatory. He says on page 79, all the desires the ego has engendered while living in the body and that have not their rightful home within the spiritual world must now be extirpated. As a combustible material is seized and burned by fire, so is the world of cravings dissolved and annihilated after death. Yeah, and I think this was pretty much my summation of these 20 pages. So thanks.
Thank you, Karsten. Very thorough summary. I'll just share briefly how I was struck by this final part of the chapter about the inferno, as you were saying, Karsten, and the burning off of these unfulfillable desires after death, and that those are remnants of unspiritualized physical cravings during life. And it's sort of the anthroposophic vision of hell, but unlike the usual theology of sin and hell in some of the monotheistic traditions, one is not eternally damned to roast in hell, but this is as you said, a purification or a purging, as it were, of what we have done to ourselves. Nobody else is doing this to us. We've done it to ourselves, and after death, it needs to be burned off. And in some sense, hell becomes a process of liberation from that, rather than just eternal damnation. And so hell is still real, but it's got a quite different function than we're usually led to believe in the traditional monotheistic religions. So I appreciated the way in which the importance of that continues, but in a different form that's part of the evolutionary process, rather than just a place that the damned, the souls who are sinners, go forever. So it's not exactly a light vision, but it is also not such a dark vision where there's no redemption. Angus, I see your hand.
Yeah. Hi. If there's a problem with the sound, just tell me and I'll cut out. But I'm on a shaky connection here in the UK. Thanks for that summary there, Carsten. So really, as Matt said, really thorough. I'd like to pick up on 2 points. I'll come back to the Dante. It's like in a second, but I'd just like to focus actually on the beginning of the chapter 3 there. This picture that Steiner is creating about the absolute necessity of this realm being impregnated or fertilized by like an invisible, this other realm, which is like beyond the senses. And I think one of the reasons, there are 2 reasons why it's so important and so interesting. One is it's like its omnipresence, so like throughout different religions. You've got it's like positive negative theology, which is also like a recognition that you have to, as it were, see life from both sides to have a full appreciation of what it is. You've got apophatic and cataphatic, I think it's called, theology, which is more or less the same as positive and negative theology, if I've understood it correctly. And then you've got, I'm just going to pull up a quote here. It's from the Ishu Upanishad, and I'll read it out to you. It's halfway through the Ishu Upanishad. Into deep darkness fall those who follow action. Into deeper darkness fall those who follow knowledge. One is the outcome of knowledge, and another is the outcome of action. Thus we have heard from the ancient sages who explained this truth to us. He who knows both knowledge and action, with action overcomes death, and with knowledge reaches immortality. And the second half of this is, into deep darkness fall those who follow the immanent. Into deeper darkness fall those. One is the outcome of the transcendent, and another is the outcome of the immanent. Thus we have heard from the ancient sages who explained this truth to us. He who knows both the transcendent and the immanent, with the immanent overcomes death, and with the transcendent reaches immortality. And anybody who's familiar with that text will sense the poetic balance of that. This essential idea that's like it's not action that'll get there, it's not knowledge that'll get there, it's both. And in Christian theology, which is particularly, I'll come back to that with Dante. It's like the emphasis on love and knowledge, not love just itself. And this is gone into detail in Paradise 12 and 13, where you've got the Dominicans and the Franciscans talking about how wisdom brings you closer to heaven. So the reason I brought that up is this balance. And then we got another fantastic piece. This is from Spinoza. Spinoza, he wrote, most people know about his ethics. I certainly wasn't aware until very recently that he had wrote it's it's an incomplete book, which is called On the Improvement of Understanding. And there are some wonderful bits. It's like in this short treatise. But I'm going to read out just two sentences from there, which also capture this idea of needing to be impregnated by the infinite. This picture that he plays with to quite some extent in the first half of the first 10 pages of chapter 3 there. So this quote from Spinoza is, "But love towards a thing eternal and infinite feeds the mind wholly with joy, and it is itself unmingled with any sadness, wherefore it is greatly to be desired and sought with all our strength." And my reading of it might not have done it justice, but if you had that sentence in front of you and had the chance to just contemplate it a little bit, the picture he's presenting is this: as we breathe out into the infinite, as we feel ourselves with our emotional lives, touching that infinite, how there's this release, this joy, and obviously we can't live in that the whole time, because we've got to be here down on earth, acting. But again, we've got this dynamic, this movement between the immanent and the transcendent, or the infinite and the finite in Spinoza, and then the positive and the negative theology that I was talking about earlier. And then when he talks about this image that he has of we're like little sponges, it's like when we come back from the world of sleep, we're like little sponges that take the essence of the infinite, bringing it's like a little bit of the infinite into us when we're away. There's so much beautiful imagery, and I believe I'm only touching the surface just with highlighting this, because there are many other parts in the beginning of this chapter. It's so beautiful. So I wanted to share that with people, and they might be able to find their own examples from poetry and literature where this dynamic between the infinite and the finite is somehow the essence of the movement and the essence of what we are as human beings. So that was what I intended to say. But because Dante has been mentioned both by Matt and Karsten, I'd like to add a further thought there. First of all, there's a big difference between Inferno and Purgatory. And what Matt was saying about the eternal damnation, certainly within anthroposophical circles, and especially in Italian anthroposophical circles, the understanding of Dante is that what the eternal damnation that is depicted in hell is actually a reflection of what it will be like in the future. If people who are familiar with pictures from the apocalypse will recognize this idea that we have a certain amount of time to wake up, but essentially the doors will close. And then if you haven't if you haven't got your white robes, to use pictures from the apocalypse specifically here, or if you would like to take a picture of the Bibles, the virgins, the 10 virgins, the ones that have got oils in their lamp, so they will be there to receive. Those that haven't, they won't. So there is also within the Inferno, or within the whole Divine Comedy, there's this idea that it's not representing reality for us now in this permanent state in Inferno, but in it will be true for the future, because there will be a final cutoff time when it will be people will be so inured in the physical, and they will have rejected the Christ impulse so thoroughly that they won't actually be able to uh, uh, save themselves, if I could put it like that. So I thought I'd share that with you guys as well. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Angus, for throwing that into the mix. Upanishads, Spinoza, Dante. Jeff, please.
Good morning. I'd like to pull on at least a couple of different threads. The first being this idea of the cravings that cannot be fulfilled, in the spiritual realm because we don't have a physical body and so on anymore. Now there's that, but also this whole chapter he kind of portrays quite a developed picture of karma, how we acquire it, how we discharge it, how we take it from one life to the next, and all these things. He goes into a lot of detail about that. But what I want to pull on particularly is again this idea of and let's go right back to actually even Carson had this in his summary, this idea of like there's a distinction here in the earth realm between the it's all like we're living through our physical body and the physical realm and the sense our sense reality and everything like that, like that's just a given. But he makes a distinction between like he starts with food. That's a great place to start. But if we're craving for foods which do fulfill a higher spiritual purpose and those which don't. And we can go through all gradations of that. That's already an interesting distinction. But why I want to pull out on that thread in particular, I'm actually what I want to do is I want to bring in Hahnemann's therapeutic system, because this chapter is incredibly rich and very illuminating, and it's kind of added a whole layer of insight and grounding from my perspective in Hahnemann's therapeutics. And again, starting with this idea of food, what is fulfilling our spiritual needs and what is not. On the surface, of course, people don't generally think too much about that. It just the old joke about the seafood diet. I see food and I eat it. But yeah, there's a much deeper implication to all this. So as I'm saying, in Hahnemann's therapeutic system, and he's not the only one. You can get 1,000 different sources to tell you about the importance of eating a wholesome diet and healthy nutrition, and of course we have a lot of material explanations for that. But what Steiner is giving us here is a very important distinction, and to say even though we can easily miss this because when we're doing things in the physical realm, we just think of it as all physical. But he's giving us this important distinction of what is properly coming from a higher spiritual purpose and fulfillment of ourselves versus what is just a pure craving. The word he uses here. So again, in Hahnemann's system, is that you can get good nutritional advice, and it is very good advice. But this broader field that Steiner is laying out here around cravings, around karma, about what we have to burn off, and essentially what we end up suffering later. What's that expression? Buy now and pay later, or something like that. But sort of that idea. But yeah, and so in Hahnemann, yeah, you do get this baseline of proper healthy nutrition, but we can take all of what Steiner's laying out here and raise it up into the higher therapeutics that Hahnemann lays out. And as I said, this really adds a great grounding and clarification for me. So, you can start at nutrition and basic exercise, basic sleep, the importance of sleep, where you started today, Karsten. All the basics of diet and lifestyle have this deeper karmic implication for ourselves. But then we go up into the realm of medicine. This is really the famous part of Hahnemann's system, is what is homeopathic medicine all about? well, at a very mundane level, yeah, it's about, treating health conditions and getting rid of certain disease expressions and so on. That's it's mundane, it's profound, it's everything in between. But in Steiner's schema here, it's very profound as well, as far as these broader questions about our karma and what we have to pay for later potentially. Because this is one of the most basic and even actually not just the not just disease and medicine, which I'm touching into now, but again, where we started with nutrition, we have this central concept or principle, the difference between resonance and attraction. That runs all the way through Hahnemann's system. Someone um, humorously but seriously referred to, actually not just anyone, Stephen Decker, who translated Hahnemann's Organon into English, he referred to it as the world's first dating manual, scientific dating manual. It's kind of a joke, but it's very serious because it taps into this deep principle of the importance of resonance and and truly, what is the karma we're accumulating when we're not living out of resonance. Now, resonance can be everything from nutrition, as we've already been talking about. It can be at the level of medicine. Do you use the correct principle of medicine, the law of similars, like here's like, to actually properly discharge and cure a disease, or do you grab the popular pharmaceutical of the day to suppress the symptoms? Well, you can get out of your suffering temporarily, but yeah, you're going to be burning off that karma, on the other side. See, I'm kind of extrapolating from Steiner's principle here, but it's very clear to me when I pull all these threads together. And then we finally go up to the third and final therapeutic jurisdiction of Hahnemann's system, above nutrition, above medicine, we get into this ultimate realm of truth versus illusion. And where we as a group can relate to that is the general practice of Goethean science. Is like, do you want to look deeply into the generative metamorphic phenomena of something, or just out on its empirical superficial layer, which of course is most of modern science. It's that latter. So at all these levels, it's this chapter's made really clear to me this big question of karma and the principles and practices at all these levels in which we either are accumulating it or we are living out of our proper spiritual unfoldment. So anyway, there's so much I could draw out of that, but that's kind of the basic concept I'm taking from this chapter.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for putting medicine in that broader spiritual context. Very helpful. Karsten, please.
Yeah, I was thinking about something that Steiner doesn't touch upon, at least not in this part. I don't know if it comes later, but things like lucid dreaming, where you become aware that you're dreaming whilst you're in the dream. So, for example, once I had the experience that I was kind of floating down from heaven down to, or from the sky down to earth through the clouds. And while I was doing that, it occurred to me that this was a dream. And I thought, oh, it's a dream. Well, then I can do whatever I want to. So I just sat down on the cloud and kind of enjoyed the freedom I had in my dream at this moment. And I mean, there's this phenomenon that is quite well described in the literature, lucid dreaming, where there's kind of your waking consciousness enters into the dream, so to speak. But also there are things like dreams where the archetypical patterns from the astral world enters into the dream and are carried into waking consciousness. So 35 years ago, I had a dream that stayed with me for all of my life. I was 25 at the time, and I was a diehard atheist and materialist, metaphysical materialist. I mean, life is what happens from birth to death, and that's it. And people who thought otherwise, in my view, they were simply too weak to face reality. And then one night I was traveling in Greece on my own, and I was sleeping cheap on the rooftop of a Greek hotel. I rented a bed there, and one night when I went to sleep, then come morning, I had this dream where I was standing on the top of a skyscraper inside, and there was a celebration. A small girl had been, she was newly born, and she was given a name. So we had this celebration, and somebody in the dream asked me, "Well, don't you want to go outside and see the fireworks?" So I went outside on this skyscraper and looked out into the sky, expecting some fireworks. And an aeroplane came by, and it dropped a bomb, and the explosion formed a smoke cloud that was shaped like a heart, and this heart was kind of arising. And at the same time, this skyscraper, due to the explosion, it collapsed beneath me. And so I just fell into the abyss. And in my dream, I was screaming, "No, no, no, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die." And then there was this voice that came into the dream, and it just said, "No, it's okay. This is how it's supposed to be." And it was so reaffirming that I just let go and allowed myself to fall into the abyss. And then I experienced this explosion of light and bliss and well-being, and I felt I was one with infinity. I had no boundaries. There was no beginning. There was no end to me. And I don't know how long I was in that state, but slowly I woke up. I moved into my waking consciousness. The sky was bluing because the sun was about to rise. And I looked up at the stars. And this thought just kind of came into my head that I'd never given any attention before. And it just said, "I am an immortal being." And it was like a certainty. I mean, I couldn't even doubt that this is how it is. And actually, I've never been able to doubt the fact that we're immortal beings after this experience 25 years ago. So I think dreams can sometimes also be something very powerful, where we bring back, and often after a while, there's this tarot card called the Tower, and I think that was very strongly the archetypical pattern that expressed itself in this dream on a personal level, and simply changed my life and my whole outlook. You could say that the worldview I had, it was crushed from one second to the next. I went to sleep as a diehard atheist and materialist, and woke up as something I didn't really know what was, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out what had happened to me. And I guess it's part of the reason why I'm interested in these books by Steiner and others who have similar thoughts. So just wanted to share that with you.
That dream's quite a gift, Karsten.
I was thinking a lot about, while I was reading, is these forces that he talks about, and I mean, always with these forces that are so important to our existence, that are so important to our becoming, to and also what force is considered to be scientifically, and how those might compare. And so, Steiner says in here, we deplete forces throughout the day. So, thinking like, okay, when I think of forces in the physical world, I think of like magnetic force or gravitational force. And these are things that are not necessarily depleted. And so, I just looked up the definition of force, and in physics, it's basically the rate of change of momentum, which is mass times velocity. And that reminded me of a lecture I read that Steiner did about velocity, saying that velocity is the true reality and that distance and space are abstractions. And, just this thinking about how what happens on this physical plane, what happens in the physical world, is also meant to inform us, and just how does this idea of force translate when we're talking about it as something that we're receiving from the spiritual world while asleep, and in the form of images or pictures. He says specifically, astral images are forces. And so, that then goes back to these ideas of pictures, light, color, matter. So, yeah, I really started thinking about then, science as it is now, and how it can be sort of transformed into a spiritual science. And his imagery of the pendulum and this kind of awake, asleep, and just these ideas of rhythm. And so that's really where I started to go with it all, is like just to truly feel like, instead of throwing the word force about, thinking that I know what that means, like both on the physical level and the spiritual level, that it would be a good exercise for me to kind of understand the concept force a little bit better. And just was wondering if anybody, had any thoughts about that, about forces that we receive from the spiritual world versus force as it's understood in the physical world.
Thanks for bringing that, Laura. I can't remember which reading cycle it was, but I feel like there was a meeting once we had where this what you just mentioned about velocity being the more fundamental reality, and as a kind of expression of the activity of spiritual beings. And it just when I was reading this chapter, I was thinking about the way he describes what it's like for the astral body to return to its world as like being like a kind of like resubmerging in the music of the spheres. And so I guess to think about, I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but like the replenishment of those forces as, yeah, like deriving from being back in that ocean of activity, and that activity, the kind of like interpenetration of those activities is what also, I guess, begets the pictures, just like what we perceive as the movement, or I guess the picture through sense perception of a plant at any given time is like the product of an activity. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. Lorenzo?
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to add something about this and try to um, explain what is my understanding of the special meaning that force. I mean, why the term force is dear to anthroposophy, unlike energy, and this also somehow relates to the idea that velocity, or better, acceleration, actually is more basic to reality than distance. And I think that both these things can be understood from, if we go back to the basics of Goethean science, because Goethean science always has this phenomenological approach, and the most solid dates that we can base our understanding of the world are those that come from the phenomena that we experience in human waking life as it is, and not, constructions, abstract constructions like physics does. So physics has distanced itself from phenomenology when it shows energy as something more fundamental than force, and but energy is more abstract. So if you read, for example, the work of the anthroposophist Ernst Mach, who worked mm, he worked about how we should look at physics from an anthroposophical point of view. He, in his book Man or Matter, discusses why force is preferable and to energy as a concept, and goes in much more detail if you're interested. And he explains it very, very clearly around the middle section of that book. And while regarding acceleration, I mean, we're talking about velocity, but I think that what actually was meant there is acceleration. This is something that it is in common with modern physics, with contemporary physics, and it's the same thing as the theory of relativity. The theory of relativity says that accelerations are absolute, while velocities and distances depend on the observer. But what is different, I think, in anthroposophy, as opposed to Einstein's understanding and the theory of relativity, is that while the subjective point of view is somehow overcome, made not necessary by this referencing to an absolute value of the acceleration, which is linked to the idea that the speed of light is the same in all frames of reference, is something that is unacceptable for an anthroposophical point of view. So I think that an anthroposophist should put into question the idea that the speed of light is the same in all frames of reference. I haven't read about this. These are just my personal thoughts and my understanding of the matter. Anyway, regarding force, you can go and read Ernst Lers and his book Man or Matter. He did a great job explaining that. Regarding acceleration, I think one should look into Ernst Mach work, which inspired Einstein, but was not really fulfilled by Einstein's theory of relativity, which was a kind of compromise. I think if we go back and look at Ernst Mach's ideas regarding mass, speed, acceleration, and so on, one finds the perfect match for Gethian science and anthroposophy. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Alex, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. One parallel that I sort of caught here in this chapter, this initial part of the chapter that I wanted to share. And for me, it felt that there's something here that in principle is similar to what we studied in the book before, the interdisciplinary astronomy, in the sense that when Steiner speaks about the bodies separating from each other and the astral body and the eye going, well, he uses the word sometimes universe or an invisible world, or the out of body or out of physical. yeah, in the way it is the same, or it's not the same, but it reminds me of when we were studying the astronomy course of this realm outside of the manifest. So, for example, we had that image of the continuous Cassini curve that sort of disappears into some invisible realm, and and other images from that course that I don't specifically remember. But somewhere also in this chapter, he speaks about the importance of looking thoroughly to what is manifested to our senses in order to begin to grasp what is behind the visible world in order to reach the invisible. So also they are a parallel with the way he was exploring and describing the phenomena of the planets in the astronomy course. So this just to say that yeah, when Steiner speaks of an invisible world or a universe where the astral and the etheric and the I sort of disappear into, for me, there's a need to just think beyond the words that he uses in order to describe that. So um, they don't really, well, there's much more to it than the actual words of just disappearing in universe, so to speak. And I think that's a bit what you're, Ashton, when you refer to the celestial spheres as well. So it's realms that touch upon the same spheres that Steiner spoke of in the astronomy course. Not to say that they're the same, that's difficult for me to know, of course, but go some tangent there that I felt was interesting to just bring up. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Alex. What you were just sharing reminded me of this other lecture cycle that I could share. But in it, Steiner says something like the movement of like the Earth and the moon and the sun is like a reflection of the supersensible activity of this human rhythm, which is just like, it's completely reverse of what we're used to thinking, or at least most of us. But anyway, as you were speaking, I was reminded of that because I felt like you were emphasizing the need to like imagine it all in an integral way rather than like abstractly as these sort of separate parts that are leaving. Um, yeah. Angus, would you like to wrap things up? We're about towards